I want to say a couple of things about why we're here. I was next door at the Nan's breakfast, and they have established an award in my wife's name, my late wife, and they decided that I should be the first recipient of that award. Emily was from the little town of Moncks Corner. We met on South Carolina State campus come March 15th, 60 years ago. I'll always remember that day because that was the first day that I was arrested. And I met her in jail on that day. About 18 months later, we were married. We stayed married for 58 years. We talked about this state that we love so much. I remember her telling me about her experiences, walking 2.5 miles to school every morning, 2.5 miles back home every afternoon. A little 22-acre farm. She learned how to drive in a pickup truck. She came to South Carolina State in that pickup truck with her luggage on the bed. How her father would walk from Moncks Corner to Somerville to work in the off-season, cutting pulpwood. We talked about what our parents sacrificed for us and what we owed to our children and all other children similarly situated. We often talked about the leadership of this country. And there's nobody who Emily loved as a leader in this country more than she loved Joe Biden. And we talked about Joe all the time. And so, as I was trying to make up my mind what I should do and when I should do it, I was informed that my accountant had passed away. And his funeral was last Friday in the rural part of Richland County. I went to the funeral. I got there about 30 minutes early. And I was walking around speaking to people, many of whom I had not seen in a long time. And I spoke to them, and there was an elderly lady in her upper 80s sitting on the front pew of the church, just a few seats away from the coffin. And she looked at me and she beckoned to me. Didn't say a word, just beckoned. I went over to her. She says, lean down. I need to ask you a question. And I leaned down. And she said, you don't have to say it out loud, but you just whispered into my ear. Who are you going to vote for next Saturday? I've been waiting to hear from you. I need to hear from you. This community wants to hear from you. I decided then and there that I would not stay silent. Martin Luther King Jr., in his letter from Birmingham City Jail, wrote that he was coming to the conclusion that the people of ill will in our society was making a much better use of time than the people of goodwill. And he feared that we would regret, not just for the vitriolic words and deeds of bad people, but for the appalling silence of good people. The appalling silence of good people. I decided After that experience last Friday with that elderly constituent and my background experiences and studies of Martin Luther King Jr., that I would break my silence today.
How are you doing, Detroit? How are you doing, Detroit? I bring you greetings all the way from Jackson, Mississippi, where I have the pleasure of serving as mayor. But I want to be clear that I am a native son of Detroit, Michigan. In fact, I'm told that I have some family here. I'll take a selfish moment and shout out to my family. How are y'all doing? Listen, I want to speak with you for a moment and share with you what brings me to this stage and share with you why I endorse Senator Bernie Sanders. 3 years ago, Bernie Sanders endorsed me as we ran on an unapologetically radical campaign, progressive campaign in Jackson, Mississippi, where we were told, just as Senator Sanders is told, that maybe I was too radical to lead our city, that maybe we would serve as a divisive force and not one that would unify the people. And so I did my homework. I learned and I studied what the word radical means. And what I learned is that a radical is a person who seeks change. And if we look outside of these walls into a community that is in need of change, into a community where there is infrastructure, where the water doesn't work as it should, then we should be as radical as the circumstances dictate it should be. If we see people who are overtaxed $600 million, then we should be as radical as the circumstances dictate we should be. If we look across history, where I'm from in Mississippi, at some of the people that we revere most, some of the people who have contributed to the most long-standing change, they were radicals. Ida B. Wells was a radical. Medgar Evers was a radical. Fannie Lou Hamer, who changed the complexion of the Democratic Party, was a radical. And so I'm happy to stand with my friend Bernie Sanders, who is a radical too. You see, I come from a legacy of activists, and so I have a propensity to talk to some of the larger things in life. And so when I campaigned and I'm knocking on doors and I'm talking about all of the things that we're talking about today, when we're talking about criminal justice reform, human rights, equity, and all of those things, invariably you're confronted with someone at the door that says, yeah, that's good, young brother, but how are you going to fix that pothole in the middle of my street, right? And so I share with them that is exactly what our mission must be, that we have to connect pothole to pothole and community to community so people in Jackson, Mississippi understand that there's a community that looks just like theirs in Detroit, Michigan, suffering from the same infrastructure problem. A community which is suffering from these same problems and in the process of fixing that pothole. What we ultimately learn is that your problem was never the pothole in the first place. Your problem is that you don't control the decision-making process that leads to a pothole being fixed. Your problem is that you don't control the decision-making process that controls the curriculum for your children. The problem is that you don't control the decision-making process that leads to universal health care so that everybody has the human right to take care of their family. And that is why I support Senator Bernie Sanders, because he has the backbone to support the issues which support our people. They try to dissuade you. They try to tell you that you don't want a democratic socialist as your president. Well, we have some news. We have some news. First and foremost, he won't even be the first socialist president. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a socialist. And Dr. Martin Luther King said it best when he said, call it democracy or call it democratic socialism. But this country must do a better job of distributing the wealth to all of God's children. And so we know that that is a mission to move us away from the policies that really affect our lives, the policies that move our families to where they must go. And so we ultimately have to come to the same understanding that King came to not long before he died. King had a conversation with Harry Belafonte where he said, listen, Harry, in the South, we're going to win this integration struggle. But I'm beginning to wonder. I'm beginning to fear that we may be integrating into a burning house. He said, I see a system that abuses labor and abuses working people. And if people can't be fed, if they can't take care of their families, then it is senseless to integrate into a house that looks like that. And so we stand, just like Bernie Sanders stood with King, I stand with Bernie because he walked with King. I stand with Bernie because he walked with Mississippi workers. I stand with Bernie because he walks with us. Bernie understands that it is not about me. It is about us.
But when he got into it, it turned out to be much more than that. Because once he got into the idea of ending segregation, he then had to talk about poverty. He then had to talk about housing in the South. Dr. King went down and established a relationship with the garbage workers, but then found out that their plight was part of a much bigger canvas, and that he had to take on the plight of all poor people.
Black or white.
Black or white.
Or any color.
All caught up in the unjust economic system.
Now, in his To the Mountaintop speech, which of course was his last,
and I've seen the promised land.
He spoke then, that was 1968, of how the nation was sick. He said, trouble in the land, confusion all around. And yet he remained hopeful because he said at that time, only when it is dark enough can you see the stars. What enabled him to stay hopeful? And you too.
His moral sense of justice. He just really felt that what he was doing was morally correct.
What do you think he would be working on today?
Well, if Dr. King had lived, there would be no today as we know it. His impact on universal order, his impact on the globe, his impact on the world had taken on such a humongous power that he was shaping human history.
Because he said we are all wrapped in a single garment of destiny.
Exactly, that there's no way out of this. Y'all can do what you want to do, but I'm gonna have to wrestle with the fact that there ain't nothing you can do but deal with it.
Okay, so what do you think it will take today to make his dream of the beloved community a reality?
Until white America regains or even decides to identify a moral course of history, I don't think anything is going to happen. I think America will self-destruct.
But the civil rights movement was blacks and white together.
Yeah.
That's not in the case anymore?
That's the case, but it's not the fact. The case is that we have to fix it. The fact is that it's not fixable if white folks don't decide to change their course of conduct. The only thing left for black people to do is to burn it down. We've been lynched, We've been murdered. And if you look around, never before in my 91 years of history as an American have I ever seen the nation more racially divisive than it is at this very moment, including the days of the Ku Klux Klan and the segregation laws of the South.